In 1979, a research team at Stockholm University began a study that was supposed to last 2 years. It ended up lasting 10. They followed 120 Swedish families with toddlers. They filmed tantrums in home settings. They measured cortisol levels before, during, and after each episode. And every 6 months, they brought the children into a lab and scanned their brains. But what they found should have changed parenting forever. Instead, it stayed buried in Scandinavian academic journals for decades, while the rest of the world kept using timeouts, yelling, and let them cry. Tested it out. Here is what they discovered. How you respond to your child's tantrum does not just determine how quickly they calm down. It physically changes the architecture of their brain. Every single tantrum is a construction site, and you are either building emotional resilience or wiring in dysregulation. And there is no neutral. Let me show you what is happening inside your child's head when they are screaming, kicking, and completely out of control. A. Tantrum involves 3 key brain regions: the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. And tantrum involves, think of the amygdala as a smoke detector. Its job is to scan for threats and sound the alarm. When a toddler feels frustrated, ignored, overstimulated, or afraid, the amygdala interprets this as a threat and triggers a full-body stress response. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the bloodstream. Heart rate jumps to 160 beats per minute or higher. Breathing becomes rapid and shallow. The body is now in survival mode. This is not a choice. It is not manipulation. It is a primitive, automatic neurological event. Now, here is the critical piece most parents do not understand. When the amygdala is activated at this level, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, impulse control, language, and emotional regulation, shuts down. It goes offline. Your child cannot calm down on command for the same reason you cannot tell your heart to stop beating. The circuit is not available. This is where the Scandinavian discovery becomes important. The Stockholm study found that the parent's response in the first 2 to 3 minutes after a tantrum begins directly determines how quickly the amygdala downregulates and how much cortisol remains in the child's system afterward. Parents who responded with yelling, shaming, isolation, or punishment produced children whose cortisol levels remained elevated for up to 90 minutes after the tantrum ended. The amygdala stayed on high alert long after the original trigger was gone. Over months and years, this pattern of prolonged cortisol exposure began to physically change the children's brains. The amygdala became more reactive and larger relative to their peers. The prefrontal cortex showed reduced connectivity, and the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory and learning, was measurably smaller. These are the same neurological patterns researchers observe in children who have experienced chronic stress or trauma. Now contrast this with what happened when parents responded differently. Parents who stayed physically present, used a calm voice, validated the emotion without fixing it, and waited. These parents produced children whose cortisol levels returned to baseline within 15 to 20 minutes. More importantly, the brain scans at 6 months, 12 months, and 5 years showed something remarkable. These children developed stronger neural connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Their brains were literally wiring in the ability to regulate emotions. They were learning, at a biological level, that big feelings are survivable, that calm follows chaos, that they are safe. Dr. Bruce Perry, one of the world's leading child trauma researchers, describes this process in a way that has stayed with me. He says, "The brain organizes in a use-dependent way. The neural circuits that fire together wire together. If every tantrum fires the circuit of fear, isolation, cortisol, and unresolved distress, that circuit becomes the default pathway. If every tantrum fires the circuit of connection, co-regulation, safety, and recovery, that becomes the default pathway. Same brain, same child. Radically different architecture, all depending on what you do in those first 2 to 3 minutes. Let me go deeper into each brain region so you understand exactly what is at stake, the amygdala. In a typical toddler, the amygdala is already disproportionately large and active compared to the prefrontal cortex. This is normal development. Toddlers are designed to feel intensely, but when a parent consistently responds to amygdala activation with fear, anger, or abandonment, the amygdala learns that the world is not safe. It becomes hypervigilant. It fires more easily and takes longer to calm. This is the neurological basis of anxiety disorders later in life. The Stockholm study found that children whose parents used punitive responses to tantrums were nearly 3 times more likely to develop clinically significant anxiety by age 10. The prefrontal cortex. This is the CEO of the brain. It is responsible for impulse control, planning, emotional regulation, and decision-making. It develops slowly and is not fully mature until the mid-20s, but the foundation is built in early childhood. Every time a parent co-regulates with a child during a tantrum, staying calm, breathing, validating, the child's prefrontal cortex is learning. It is forming the neural pathways that will eventually allow the child to regulate their own emotions without external help. Think of it like learning a language. You cannot expect a child to speak fluent emotional regulation at age 2. You speak it to them first. They listen. They absorb. And one day, they speak it back. That is prefrontal cortex development in action, the hippocampus. This region converts short-term experiences into long-term memories and also helps regulate the stress response. Chronically elevated cortisol is toxic to hippocampal neurons. The Stockholm study was one of the first to demonstrate that harsh parental responses to tantrums were associated with smaller hippocampal volume. Years later. But here is the hopeful part. The damage is not necessarily permanent. Research from the University of Oslo in 2022 showed that when parents shift to a connection-based approach, hippocampal function can improve. The developing brain is remarkably plastic. It responds to the environment. Change the environment, and you change the brain. So what did the Scandinavian parents in the study do that produced these dramatically different outcomes? It was not complicated. They did 4 things consistently. First, they paused. They did not react immediately. They allowed 9 to 15 seconds of silence before intervening, giving the child's amygdala time to begin its natural downregulation. Second, they got physically low. They knelt or sat so they were at the child's eye level or below. This signals safety at a neurological level. Third, they used affect labeling. They named the emotion, "You are really angry right now." This activates the prefrontal cortex and begins to reduce amygdala firing. And fourth, they stayed. They did not isolate, exile, or send the child away. Their physical presence was the intervention. The most striking finding from the 10-year follow-up was this. Children whose parents used this approach did not just have better emotional regulation. They had higher academic performance, stronger peer relationships, and lower rates of behavioral problems. One parenting variable, how you respond to tantrums, predicted outcomes across multiple domains of life. Here is what this means for you. Every tantrum is an opportunity, not an opportunity to teach a lesson about behavior or consequences or respect, an opportunity to build brain architecture. When your toddler is melting down and you feel the urge to yell or threaten or walk away, remember what is happening inside their skull. The amygdala is screaming. The prefrontal cortex is offline. Cortisol is flooding their system, and they are looking at you, the most important person in their world, for a signal. Is this scary? Am I safe? Can I come back from this? Your response is the signal, and that signal is physically shaping the brain that will carry them through the rest of their life. Scandinavian parents figured this out in 1979. The science has only gotten stronger since. The question is not whether tantrums will shape your child's brain. They will. The question is what shape they will take, and that answer is, quite literally, in your hands.